along usually with Billy Georgiatsakis, the Greek. And this week, Billy's off, got some work commitments, but pleased to have another great guest. You know him, you love him. Alex Campbell, regular contributor right here on the Fired Up Network, along with our great producer and the man who runs Fired Up, Mr. Joseph Pasek. Of course, we're sponsored. We're thrilled and honored to be sponsored by, of course, COSA, Standardbred Horse Racing Association of Ontario, and Nikki, the king of carpets. And we'll have the COSA Classic a little bit later, but you can probably tell by my attire, we might be talking a little hockey. Yeah,
just maybe, huh?
What's that, Alex?
I said just maybe, huh?
Yeah, just maybe. Yeah. See, this is the Leaf team I grew up with from the '60s. I got my Maple Leaf Gardens patches. You can't get those anymore. Those are like 20 years gone.
That's true.
And this was the jersey they wore when I was a kid. Well, that's the team I love.
That's stylish. I like it.
What's that?
That's stylish. I like it.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's classic because they won 4 Stanley Cups in that time when they were wearing that jersey. That was their road jersey, of course. But Alex, great to have you on. Thanks for just obviously for Leaf fans. It's a pretty special time. First time since '04, the early part of the millennium. They've made it to the second round.
Yeah,
and they took out their nemesis, the Tampa Bay Lightning. So interesting. I mean, there's so many topics we can explore, but I think a lot of Leaf fans, so let's get right to that, are excited in the sense that they're anticipating the Florida Panthers will be an easier go for the blue and white than the Boston Bruins. I'm not so sure about that because, Alex, we can definitively say that, if anything, in the regular season, Florida dramatically exponentially underachieved. They almost didn't make the playoffs, so they underachieved. They should have been much better. What they showed in the playoffs, that's more like the Florida Panthers we were expecting, led by Mr. Tkachuk. And, you know, I'm not saying anything in terms of how the Leaf players look at this or Sheldon Keefe. I'm sure they were watching closely what happened with Florida and the Bruins.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't think they're excited about Florida because Florida showed the kind of Florida, like I said, we should have seen, but that's a scary good team. And Tkachuk, he's one of those, to me, he's like not only like his dad, but he's like a throwback guy. He may be friends with most of the guys in the league. I'm sure they respect him, but he is out there, and you can tell his attitude is take no prisoners. I'm not saying the Leafs can't or won't win, but I think it's going to be a throwback series, like a 60s hard-hitting or a 70s series, hard-hitting, nasty stuff, and probably unpredictable. Before last night, I would have said Leafs in 6. I think it's a 7-game series. I'll give the Leafs a slight edge, but I don't think most people who are neutral about this would be totally shocked if Florida won either.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Norm. I mean, I wasn't even after. I mean, if you told me going into that Bruins series that, you know, Florida was going to win in 7 games, I guess I would have been surprised, right? But you know, after the first few games, after we saw Bergeron go down, and then especially after we saw Bergeron come back, and, you know, to be honest, Patrice Bergeron just didn't look super healthy when he came back. In fact, once he came back, they dropped 3 straight, and I think trying to like really interject him and Krejci into the lineup constantly to really, you know, get them to be the champions, basically, that pushed them there, I think was one of the downfalls that Montgomery made in the end of that series, and just trying to kind of force feed those two, when really you look around and Pasta was probably your actual leader, and how does he not get more time on the ice than, say, Bergeron does after the injury? I don't know. I thought that the move to put Swayman in was great, but you know, because Allmark was struggling so much. But at the same time, this is how professional sports playoffs work anymore. I think if you really were to go back, you know, 15, 20 years, it meant a lot to get that number 1 seed. You know what I mean? It meant a lot to get that number 1 seed. Anymore, it seems like the team that gets hot at the right moment is more dangerous than the number 1 seed.
Well, I'll give you a perfect example of that, or I'll give our viewers, listeners, a perfect example of that. And you already know this. This would be Exhibit A to maybe, I'm saying perhaps, I'll underline that, perhaps underline the Florida Panthers. We don't have to go further back than the 2012 Los Angeles Kings, Alex. I think they made the playoffs the last weekend of the schedule, and we know the rest of the story. They went on to win their Stanley Cup, and they repeated 2 years later, 2014. They had, and like Florida did, They underachieved tremendously in that regular season. They just got in, and then they got hot, and they won the cup. And so that doesn't mean some people are going to be freaking out saying, I'm not saying Florida is beating the Leafs necessarily or winning the cup, but I'm saying there is precedent for teams that struggle, that just squeeze in. And by the way, Leaf fans, I know because I was around then, I was 12 years old. The 67 Maple Leafs were in danger. The Stanley Cup team they had in Centennial year. They were in danger of missing the playoffs. Their coach, Punch Imlach, took sick. King Clancy replaced him behind the bench for 10 games. And they were taking on teams on paper and on points that were much better than them. So maybe there's a parallel because the Leafs were the last, in terms of playoff teams, they were 38 to 40 years on average of age, and no one was expecting them to take out both Chicago and Montreal. Go right ahead, Alex.
No, yeah, but I was going to say is that, what's interesting to me, when the Bruins lost that Game 7, that actually they took over the record from the Leafs for the most Game 7 losses in modern NHL history. I mean, so both teams have a bit of a history of coughing the bag down the stretch. However, I do think, to me, what's most interesting probably about this series is that the 7-game series against Boston almost provides kind of a boost for both sides. It provides a boost for the Panthers to say, hey, we can beat the best team. The Bruins are basically supposed to be the best team in hockey since the mid-90s Red Wings.
Yeah.
I mean, not even just this year, but like since the mid-90s Red Wings, since Sergei Fedorov and Steve Yzerman played together. You know what I mean? And a lot of people thought they were even better than that team. Now I'm from the Detroit area, so I have a hard time. I mean, I watched that team growing. You talk about your childhood. That was I'm a 90s kid. That was my childhood. I watched Yzerman, Fedorov, and Lirianov and Chris Osgood, and you know what I mean, all those guys and Paul Coffey and like that Nick Lidstrom, that was my team, you know what I mean. And to me, I've never seen a better hockey team than that for a longer period of time. But yeah, I think this Bruins team was supposed to be, basically the best team really since then. And, that has to instill a lot of confidence in this Florida team. Tkachuk played phenomenal. I thought the Bennett line was really good. They did a great job, especially like in the shorthand situation. You know what I mean? They did great on the penalty kill, and they took advantage of the power play. And you had to. That to me, it was amazing to watch Montgomery get out coached, because to me, they picked apart the biggest weakness of the Bruins. And I guess back to the main point, though, is that it has to instill a lot of confidence in the Panthers, but it also has to instill confidence in the Leafs. Like far and away, the biggest obstacle to the Leafs getting the Stanley Cup was the Bruins. So now they're not there anymore. So I think their road gets a lot easier, but now you got to go up against this buzzsaw. So we'll see. I'm in the same camp as you. I wouldn't be shocked at all this goes 7 games, and I think at that point it's basically a coin flip. Although I would, if you asked me to throw money on it, I'd put money on the Leafs to win the series. I would have done the same thing with the Bruins, though.
Sure. So Alex, another little X factor. Paul Maurice, a former Maple Leafs coach, and I'm sure, as you know, and probably most of the people watching might remember, it was a game against the Maple Leafs where Paul Maurice lost it. Like, I don't think I've ever seen an NHL coach verbally lose it. Like, it's like, I'm sure some of the people even behind the seats were like, Coach, come, I'll buy you a drink, relax. But everybody knows that, you can't do that all the time. You got to say, you got to pick your spots, because otherwise the players just tune you out. But they didn't tune them out. They responded. And that might have been not that game specific, but just that speech and its short and long-term effects might have been what got those Panthers going, because obviously he was feeling it, that they had underachieved, not just that game to that point in time, but the whole bloody season. Now, there's other factors and injuries, but, that usually in the dressing room, it's throw around the Gatorade container and, throw a few suits on the floor, like, the kind of stuff you see in movies, because sometimes it does happen, but you rarely see it where a coach, as Hollywood-like, called out his team for the entire arena to hear and see. I don't think I've ever seen that at the NHL level.
It's honestly, it's hard to remember seeing it in sports. I mean, I can remember a few times a football coach calling out the entire team, or calling out an individual player or a side of the ball. But I think you're right. I can't remember a hockey coach calling out an entire team like that. I've seen, I guess, a couple times in baseball, some similar things have happened, but normally it's about an individual player. And even that is rare. Normally it's not like the coach calling out the entire team, but yeah, I think he lit a fire, and I think I think it worked. Paul Maurice is a guy, that's basically had at least a modicum of success everywhere he's gone. I mean, he's kind of like, kind of reminds me a lot of like Marty Schottenheimer. He's had some success, but he's got to win the big one. Maybe this is his chance. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, to your point, he could be a bit of a hothead.
All right. So does the Maple Leafs taking on an unexpected opponent is, do you think it's if you're in the mind of a Leaf player or Sheldon Keefe, is it a relief but also an anxiety? Like, in other words, is a mixed bag. Well, we're relieved they're thinking that we're relieved we don't have to play the Bruins at their best like they were in the regular season. But then again, Florida is kind of like, this isn't the Florida we saw this year.
Yeah, this, like you said, this is the Florida we expected to see. It's not the Florida we saw. So any games we played against this season kind of go right out the window. You know what I mean? And then the two, when you catch, and what I said at the beginning of this conversation, you catch a team that barely sneaks into the playoffs and gets hot. That is the most dangerous team in the playoffs in the modern era of any professional sport. I mean, I think we can all remember those Eli Manning teams that snuck into the playoffs and dethroned Brady twice. You know what I mean? Like that. And in both years, one more than the other, when we thought like nobody was going to beat the Patriots in that game. You know what I mean? Like it just wasn't possible. When they had that year, they had Randy Moss. They went undefeated. Like, I mean, come on. Like anybody who says they called that game, but come on, no, you didn't.
Yeah,
no, you didn't. That was crazy. And so it's kind of the same thing. You're running up against a buzzsaw, and I agree. Like there's got to be a little trepidation there because this is not the same team that you prepared for and played all year. This is something different. It's a makeup of the same players, and there's a certain mystification to that because then, I mean, how do you prepare other than to say, well, it's the same thing, but we expect them to be at their absolute best.
All right, let's another great story for the National Hockey League. There's something in the water, obviously in Seattle. Some of the greatest musicians, the grunge movement. I mean, other than the British invasion of the '60s, I don't think anything's better than the grunge. And then, of course, the godfather of guitar, Jimi Hendrix, way back, also a Seattle native. And their sports teams. That's a great sports town. I don't know if it's up there with Boston, but there's no doubt it's a great sports town. And the Kraken just recently out of expansion, and here they are. I mean, there's no pressure on them. Everything they're doing is gravy. And, they play an aggressive, determined style. And I'm sure for their opponents, it's like maybe it is a little bit scary how well they play.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is. I mean, so you're kind of looking at kind of the same thing, only on the Western side too. I mean, Kraken are the buzzsaw right now, and if you look, actually, the Kraken are getting more action in Vegas right now than the Panthers are. There's money going on them as right now. I can't quote the actual line off the top of my head, but I was looking earlier today. There are a lot more prop bets, future bets for them to actually be the Stanley Cup, champion here now. And their odds have been increased dramatically, whereas Florida's odds have only ticked up a little bit. So I think people are really jumping on the bandwagon here. Yeah, I read a really interesting article on Yahoo Sports earlier today about this, though. It's funny because over the last couple of years, Seattle sports teams it's really the last 10 years, Seattle sports teams have dominated Denver sports teams. Dominated. The only team that could hold a candle to that Peyton Manning Denver Broncos team was the Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson Seahawks. And then now, in with the Seahawks, you see Russell Wilson goes to Denver, and still the Seahawks are dominant over Denver. And then it extends even to baseball. The Mariners actually swept the Rockies earlier this season. So it's a weird thing that like Seattle kind of has going on with Denver right now. And has for at least the last few years, that it just seems like these teams from Seattle always end up, like you said, something in the water. They just, the Denver teams, no matter how stacked they are, the Avalanche were a heavy favorite in this series. They can, for some reason, it's just worked.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's more kind of like, sort of jokingly, but based on how the Mariners traumatized Blue Jay fans last fall, I kind of wonder if somehow the dice roll Toronto versus Seattle in a cup of, oh yeah, Toronto, obviously. But wait a second, wasn't everybody saying that about the Mariners last year in baseball?
Yep, yep. Boy, that would be a really interesting Stanley Cup final, just to see an upstart team like the Kraken. You know what I mean? That's such a, like you said, an expansion team, a new fan base.
Yeah.
Really, you know what I mean? So they got to be really energized. I think they've done a really good job selling out that arena. Their fans seem to be pretty energized for an expansion. You don't always get that. You don't always get that with expansion teams. So, you know what I mean? That would be great. This is the best part of hockey, though. It just is. The Stanley Cup playoffs are just phenomenal. It just seems like every year there's always so much theater, so many stories. It's just so much fun to watch. I got to be honest. I'm not a big hockey fan of the regular season. I'm really not. I watch a few here and there, but if the Red Wings aren't competitive, I'm not watching a whole lot until the playoffs. It's kind of like I'm similar with baseball. I'll follow it statistically, but you know what I mean. I'm not really. You could put most regular season NBA games in the same mix. I pay attention to the stats, but
I don't think any Leaf fans are dissimilar. Once the Leafs are out, and they got used to that for the last 2 decades, basically.
Yeah,
it's casual viewing, but you're not going to cancel your social plans. And then maybe for the Stanley Cup Finals, depending on the matchup, how the series is going, there's a game 7. Oh, you'll watch it because it's game 7. Yeah. Or depending again on who's involved, the star power. But no one in Toronto cancels their plans once the Leafs are out to watch the playoffs, other than the diehards or the gamblers, or you got nothing else to do. Okay, well, I'll check out. There's some playoff games on, right? So I think most fans everywhere, maybe not for the NFL play, but I don't know. I mean, do Bills fans stop watching? I mean, I don't mean the Super Bowl, but do they stop watching the playoffs until the Super Bowl once the Bills are out? Or Steelers fans, or name whoever you like?
Football seems to be the infallible sport. It just does. People watch football. You know what I mean? People watch big time bowl games. People watch NFL playoff games, whether their team's in it or not. And you don't have to look any farther than the ratings to show that. Okay. The football ratings, absolutely. Playoff football ratings and college bowl game ratings annihilate other sports ratings than the Nielsen ratings. They just do. The number that an NFL playoff game puts up is traditionally 2 or 3 times the number that an MLB playoff game puts up, which is pretty crazy.
So that's regardless of who's playing, right across.
Yeah. Well, when you look at it from that standpoint, the Nielsen ratings, that's kind of your barometer for that. You know what I mean? There are only so many people who are actually in Alabama who are Alabama fans, but when they play, most of the country's watching.
Yeah,
because
they got the name. Yeah,
because they got the name. So when those big schools, especially if they're in the big games, I mean, like the Michigan-Ohio State game is, you know what I mean? There are tons of viewers on that game, no matter what. You know what I mean? Same thing with the Iron Bowl. There are tons of viewers on that game, no matter what. And when you talk about the bigger bowl games, I mean, they just get millions and millions and millions of people to tune in, and that's why the TV deals in college football have pushed things to an insane point with all of this conference realignment, is because of those ratings are so sky high versus the other sports that like these conferences can just name their number. I mean, Big Ten schools are getting some crazy like $70 million a year now. And that's exactly why USC and UCLA are going to come to the Big Ten from California.
Yeah.
They can't make 70 out there.
Yeah. We were talking about that last time, with my school, ACC, and you're saying sooner or later, someone's going to put some major wads of money in front of Clemson. Clemson, how would you like to join us maybe in the SEC instead of ACC's okay, but who have you really got, right? I'm
right.
It's happening already. I don't know.
The SEC has to be salivating just over Clemson right now. They're in their backyard. It's perfect. They end up playing the same upper echelon SEC teams in bowl time anyways the last 10 years or so. That has to be the number one target for the SEC right now. But yeah, you're right. We did talk about it last week. But I think it ties right into that though this same conversation about, you know what I mean, how the viewers are there for football, and they tend to be more regional for the other sports. Especially, I would say, hockey and baseball.
All right. By the way, are the NBA playoffs also regionalized, or are people pretty much across the country, because of the star power of the most of the teams, maybe not all, is magnetic enough that, well, I don't like that team, but I like watching fill in the blank, Steph, or who, depending on which team, or LeBron. I may hate him, but hey, he's theater, right? He's box office. You want to watch him.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the NBA really has like kind of the best mix of fans as far as like a demographic to really capture an audience, because I think a lot of the older fans of the NBA are fans of teams, and a lot of the younger fans of the NBA are fans of players. And so I think that they get eyeballs no matter what, as long as it's not a stinker series where we don't have any we don't have any big time superstars in the series. Which at this point, you look around the league, who's left in the playoffs right now, that's not going to happen. I mean, there's literally a superstar in every team. There's a reason to root for every single team. I would say probably the least star-studded team is the Knicks, I guess. But I mean, you look around. I mean, Miami's got, Jimmy Butler is putting up Michael Jordan numbers in the playoffs right now. He just got an ankle injury, and I think we're all looking to see if he can have a flu game next, because that's kind of what we've come to expect. You know what I mean? Anthony Davis is playing like a top 5 player in the NBA right now, and has been for about the last 20 games. And so the Lakers are on a high echelon. You got Steph Curry dropping 50 points last night, putting the team on his back. Kevon Looney pulling down 22 rebounds. You know what I mean? That Kings team couldn't get a rebound all game long because of Kevon Looney. That was crazy. I watched both of those last night. I watched the Bruins debacle, and I also watched the Warriors game, and they were both just great theater.
Well, it's kind of interesting because the last time you joined us, it was just before the playoffs got underway, and I was asking, well, do you think the Nuggets would be worried no matter when and if they play? But 2 names come up. The Lakers, because of LeBron and what he's done on his own, or whether he's with stars or with beer league guys, it's a bit of an exaggeration. And, of course, the Warriors, maybe not the vintage Warriors of 3, 4, 5 years ago, but they're still the Warriors. And every team is going to, damn, we have to play them, right?
Mm-hmm. The Warriors, to me, the Warriors are the absolute smartest franchise in sports, top to bottom. They make the right choice, it seems like, every single time, whether it's a roster move or it's player personnel inside. Just look at what happened with Andrew Wiggins this year. I believe that if any other team has a player like that goes through some personal struggle and has to take time off, especially in California, there's going to be a leak of some kind. It's going to ruin his psyche to some extent. They're probably not going to allow him to take that much time off because they don't feel like they have the luxury to, because they don't have Chef Curry in their back pocket. And so for a myriad of reasons, you know what I mean? I just think that, Kerr and the front office have that thing running so smooth. They are the smartest franchise. So what they did with Wiggins instead is they let him take all the time he needs. You take the time to deal with your crisis, young man. And what did they do? They made sure he was back healthy and ready in time for the playoffs. You know what I mean? Like that was perfect. They also quietly went out and re-signed Gary Payton Jr., which no media was even talking about, but essentially they just put like a lockdown perimeter defender on their team right before the playoffs. They just make the smartest decision time and time again. And they've got, honestly, LeBron is dominant. Curry is magical. I mean, Curry is he just does things that, look, LeBron is 6'8" and 250 and runs over everyone if he can't run by him. Curry can't do either. And he still puts up the numbers he does. I think, honestly, I have always had kind of a rotating top 5 best basketball players of all time at each position. This series, that game last night, Curry is the best point guard of all time, in my opinion. Like that switch just flipped. Because to me, I love Magic a lot, but he can play 5 positions, but he's 6'9" at a time when you did not see a lot of larger point guards. At this point, you've got guys that are 7 foot tall bringing ball down the floor in the NBA.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I wonder, if we could, if we heard from the likes of, if they were watching, if they could watch, Wilt Chamberlain, go through a whole long list of some of the greats from the 50s and the 60s, and Bill Russell, let's say. If they could watch what we're watching, and everyone's watched with Steph Curry, like how close would he be inching up to Michael Jordan? Not ahead of him, but at least, just behind him.
Just behind him. I just don't think that's an echelon he could ever reach, ever. And the only reason I say that is because you can't play defense at that level. I mean, he's a willing defender. He's not an atrocious defender. Look, and that's the thing. I'll go back to Magic Johnson, who I thought before last night, I thought was the number 1 point. Magic was a pretty bad defender for the most part, and which is surprising given his size and athleticism. Surprising. That to me means a motivation thing. If you're that big and fast and strong and you have an issue on defense, you can play. How can you play 5 positions on offense and you're not a very good defender? That doesn't make any sense.
All right.
Right. And so, but Curry is a willing defender, but he's not like, neither of them are elite defenders. Whereas guys like Jordan was an elite defender. LeBron is an elite defender. So they're elite on both ends. Curry does not have the athletic capacity to be elite on the defensive end. So I don't think he's ever going to reach the status of greatest player of all time or GOAT. I think it's already been true for a few years. He's the greatest shooter of all time. And that in and of itself is amazing. When you consider guys like Pistol Pete Maravich, Reggie Miller, Ray Allen, and the list goes on. And we can just pick one guy out and say, yep, he's the best shooter of all time. And it really is that obvious. I mean, I don't know what numbers Pistol Pete would have racked up if we had a 3-point line in his era. I'm still willing to bet Curry's a better 3-point shooter than him. Okay. I think most of us are.
All right. You may have noticed, folks, Billy Georgiatsakis, he's off this week on a work assignment, but I know he's watching and sending out the show, so thanks for your help with that, Billy. And, of course, Joe Pasek producing here at the home base of the Fired Up Network, so thanks again to Joe for always helping us, and things need to be solved, resolved, whatever he gets it done. Alex Campbell, great guest, regular contributor, always pleased to have him on. So back to the hockey, and, for Canadians, the dream come true, at least in terms of this year's group, would be the Leafs against the Oilers. The country would shut down. I mean, you can't ask for more than East versus West, right? Right. We saw some of that, back in the Gretzky, the Oilers, great teams, and they're still playing the Habs, and Calgary was pretty damn good too. So there was some of that before, but now 2 teams in the pool, and you can make an argument for the Leafs or the Oilers winning the cup, but to see the Leafs with their, that foursome, and then Connor McDavid and Draisaitl and Hyman, but especially Connor. Connor is, you can hate the Oilers, you can hate Connor, but put hockey in any continent, put it any continent in the world. They probably at least heard, oh yeah, I heard about that guy, right? He's at the stage now where any city, oh, McDavid's coming, I got to watch the guy play. I hope they lose, but I got to watch, right? But for Canadian, if it was the Leafs against the Oilers, the government might as well shut down the country for 10 days or 2 weeks. No, seriously, I'd be at that level.
Yeah, no, I mean, it would be an absolute fever pitch, I think. And to be honest, I'm rooting for it. I mean, hockey is more of a Canadian sport at the end of the day. I think that a lot of Americans aren't willing and don't often admit that, but that's the reality of it. It is absolutely whereas football is an American sport and Canadians enjoy it too. Hockey is a Canadian sport and Americans tend to enjoy it too. And this is, look, like I said, I'm from the Detroit area. We used to call ourselves Hockey Town. You know what I mean? Hockey Town USA, but it was Hockey Town USA. It wasn't Hockey Town Canada, because we could never take that moniker. I would love to see the Oilers and Connor McDavid against the Maple Leafs. I think that would be a sensational series, and I would just love to see the fandom go nuts. I mean, to me, the only thing I can even picture rivaling it was like when the Red Sox finally won that World Series after the drought in 2004. Because and in this case, you'd have both fan bases acting like that.
Oh yeah. Well, by the way, I'll just total objectivity, the strengths, weaknesses. Both clubs actually have questions on defense and in net, right? There's a balance there. And then Connor's on another universe that we've never even heard. It's like he's from light years away. He is. In terms of his skill, he's like, I don't know, he's like Jim Brown on skates.
It's like watching it. Yeah, it's like watching a prime LeBron James, you know what I mean, or a prime Michael Jordan, or a prime Jim Brown, or a prime Walter Payton just slice through a league. I mean, it really is a lot like that watching him play. Like I said, I don't watch a lot of hockey, but if he's on, I'll tune into that. He's fun to watch. Yeah,
absolutely. And the Leafs, have bundles of offense led by Austin Matthews. He's not in Connor's league, nobody else's, but Austin can win a game or win games on his own, right? He can. Yeah. He's on his A game. He can take over a game, get a couple of assists, couple of goals, right? So he can do that, not the way that Connor does, but just with his skill and his, he's got the right mindset, right? So to me, I would pick it as a 7-game pick 'em. How about you?
Yeah, I think so too. I agree. I think Toronto has a little bit deeper roster, especially on the offensive side. Like you said, they both have some deficiencies on defense and some questions in the net. And so because of that, look, hockey is a game where you have line after line after line after line of skaters. So one guy makes a difference. I mean, there's no question he makes a difference, but that's not the entire team. And I think that it's a good equalizer that they have the best player on the planet, and that I believe the Maple Leafs are a little deeper offensively, deeper enough to equalize it out.
Yeah. All right. So, okay. So, obviously, you're objective. You're a Red Wings fan. You're a Michigan guy. So, with no bias anywhere, of the pool that's left in the National Hockey League, based on skill and every other thing that you would look at, who would be your picks now to get to the finals without having a favorite?
I would say probably the Golden Knights from the West. I like Vegas a lot. I think they're going to be really hard to beat. I think they take the series against the Oilers, and I would say probably the Leafs on the other side.
Okay.
I think the Leafs, in my opinion, have the easiest path in the East. And I'd say I don't expect anybody to unseat the Golden Knights in the West.
All right. Okay. So if the Leafs go head to head with the Vegas Knights, who would there be an edge, or what edge would either team have?
I'd give a slight edge, I suppose, to Vegas. I think they've got a better goaltending. It's really like what we just talked about. They play pretty good defense. They've got better goaltending. They're probably a little less firepower offensively, but not much. And they've been such a good complete team all year long. They put together. I mean, what were they? I'm looking right now. 51-22. They won the West just barely over Edmonton, who went 50-23. But yeah, I mean, they've been a good team all year. They've been pretty much the odds-on favorite from the West all year. I would probably give the slight edge to Vegas, but then, there's something about hockey where, like, my heart is just in the place of the original teams. It just is. I mean, there have been so many expansion teams, like, so it's hard. I have a bias. If that series were set up, like, if you made me throw money on it, I'd probably give a slight edge to Vegas, but I'd definitely be rooting for the Leafs. I would definitely be rooting for the Leafs. In these situations, I'm always rooting for the team that was an original team versus the expansion team. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of funny. I think in terms of the mentality, the Flyers kind of changed the mold when they won their back-to-back cups in 74 and 75, because 74, they were only 7 years out of expansion, which was remarkable. And not only, they didn't fluke the cup, they were mean, nasty, dirty, and highly skilled. It's at every position. It's hard to get that combination where you could be dirty selectively, mean, like scary mean. I mean, they would take penalties because they knew they could kill them off. So I read that somewhere. I think maybe Fred Shero's philosophy was, don't be afraid to, like, stick guys a little bit, give them an elbow, because we're good enough. We can kill penalties, and the referees can't call everything because the game will never finish. That was their philosophy.
Yeah, that reminds me a lot of, like, the mid-90s Avalanche teams when they had, Forsberg, and they had Roy and Net, and they had all those bruisers. That, to me, that was the Wings bugaboo. I mean, they really, for a couple of years there, just couldn't get past the Avalanche, and the Avalanche were just such a tough out. Of course, Forsberg ends up, wrecking Draper's jaw in that one game, and there's a huge kerfuffle, and I mean, but they did the same thing. They knew they could kill the penalty. They just take it to take it, and there was the same philosophy. But they're not going to call every one of them. So we're just going to do what we have to do to be the more aggressive, more physical team, and that's where the Avalanche got you. And they had such a good goalie in that and Roy that you weren't going to outscore them, even on the penalty kill.
All right. So some folks just tuning in or checking out, where's Billy? Billy's off on his own. He's got his own working obligations. Like, I got a full-time job, so Billy does too, as does Alex. Yeah, we all got jobs. So anyway, Billy's off on a work.
This doesn't quite pay the bills.
Yeah. Podcasting these days for most of us is for fun, a few extra coins, some coffee money, some grocery money. But that's the reality, folks. So just like most of you or all of you, we have jobs and careers, and the sports is for fun on the side, and hopefully a lot of extra money and a lot of fun. So yeah, right. Billy will be back, not to worry. I mean, he loves screaming at me and yelling at me and trashing. Like, I'm sure even tonight he's missing doing that. He's probably watching, finding a few things he wants to shred me on.
I'm sure.
Yeah, Alex, he has a lot of respect for, as do I, because what's he going to nail Alex on? It's like,
he doesn't have enough. It doesn't have enough on me yet. he just doesn't have enough on me yet.
Maybe he's researching, but anyway, not to worry, folks. My good friend, Mr. Billy George Atsakis, the Greek, he'll be back next week. guaranteed for sure. All right, we got more to talk about. I'm going to let our trusty and very competent producer Joe Pasek know. We'll go to the COSA break for the COSA Classic, and of course Nicky, the king of carpets. And when we come back, lots more to talk about, including Alex has a lot of expertise on the NFL draft. All of you have favorite NFL teams, or most of you do. So we'll talk a little bit about that, more hockey.
Yeah,
as we continue. It's usually almost always RUMACK and the Greek, or the Greek and Storm and Norm. But as I mentioned, Billy's off. Alex Campbell, great knowledgeable individual on just about every sport on the face of the earth. So we'll be back with that right after we go to the COSA Classic and give a big...
In the history of harness racing, and Niatros and Clint Galbraith are on their way, headed now to the quarter-mile mark. Niatros, world champion, 52-4 in a race, the fastest performer ever in a race. The 3-year-old son of Albatross, thundering toward the quarter-mile mark, with earnings of over $1,700,000 career, earnings of over $1,100,000 in 1980, his 3-year-old form. And Niatros rolling to the quarter-mile station. Clint Galbraith sends that 3-year-old past the first marker in 27-3. Steady Star was there in 28-2 in his world record performance in 1971. And now they head down the backside. Niatros, prompted by Freddie Bach and by Dennis Lacey, racing toward the half-mile station. Niatros racing for Clint Galbraith to the half, off the quarter, 27-3. Steady Star, big quarter in the second quarter, was there in 54-3. And Niatros is at the half-mile mark, exactly identical to Steady Star. He's there in 54-3. And now he's racing toward the 3/4 mile mark. Niatros, 3 at the half and 54-3. Headed toward 3/4. Off a front panel, 27-3. Half, 54-3. The second quarter in 27 seconds. He's at the draw gate. Niatros and Clint Galbraith approaching the 3/4 mile mark. And the big, powerful 3-year-old has just reached that station in 1:21-4. Here it comes! They turn for home. Niatros, 21-4. Unbelievable 3/4. And Galbraith has him in gear. He's in the final 8. Niatros is going to be the fastest ever in the sport. He races the wire. Niatros, 52-4 record performer, approaches the wire. 3/4, 21-4. And Niatros is home in 49 1/5. You've seen it. There it is. The first sub-50 performance.
By now, you know the name COSA TV, an industry leader producing unique, high-quality digital content promoting harness racing in Ontario. Features, virtual programming, live events, and more. COSA TV has it covered. Follow our social media channels and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube page to view the latest content. And if you're looking to bet your favorite Ontario track, check out hpibet.com. COSA TV, taking Ontario racing global.
Okay, we're back, and Norm RUMACK, and of course Alex Campbell. Billy, if you're just tuning in, Billy the Greek is off this week on a work assignment as regular work, and but he'll be back next week, so not to worry. And thanks again to COSA, the Ontario Standardbred Horse Racing Association, loyal sponsors. I had the great honor and pleasure of working with them when I was on the air at the Fan for many, many years at Woodbine Racetrack specifically. And I can attest to their outstanding dining facilities, aside from the entertainment with the horse racing, whether you're into harness or thoroughbred or both, whatever the case may be. And of course, Nicky, the king of carpets, big Habs fan, so not much at stake for him in the playoffs, but hey, he's a good guy, big hockey fan, and we're honored and pleased and grateful for his sponsorship. Nicky, of course, the king of carpets, and COSA, the Standardbred Horse Racing Association. So thanks again. We're grateful for your loyalty.
Absolutely.
We continue with Alex Campbell. So, Alex, most of our viewers have favorite, NFL teams, including, of course, Billy, the big Cowboys fan, and of course, a lot of Bills fans for sure, who in Southern Ontario. who are season ticket holders at Orchard Park. So, who are the, for lack of a better term, from your perspective, Alex, who are the winners and the losers in the recent NFL draft?
Well, I think that a lot of people are really high on Houston, right? For trading back up to the third pick to get Will Anderson after grabbing C.J. Stroud. I've never been real high on C.J. Stroud. let me just be honest right there. I think that to me the Texans is the most overvalued draft out there. I think Anderson's a great player, but I do think that if in a lot of other years, if you had somebody like Aiden Hutchinson or a J.J. Watt or a Bosa, that he probably wouldn't be the top edge rusher in the draft. He's just not, in my opinion, of that same echelon. He's kind of like the next tier down. So I like that pick. I think he goes probably in that 3 spot, whether they take him or not. But overall, I'm not as high on Houston as everybody else. I'll talk about like the Bills, by the way, who you mentioned. There are a lot of fans in the viewer network. I thought the Bills had a very good draft, very, very good draft, like sneaky good. Dalton Kincaid was a phenomenal pick. I think Kincaid was the best tight end in the draft, and I think the second best tight end is probably Darnell Washington. And they got the best one. I really like Osiris Torrance and Dorian Williams, the linebackers they picked up, which they had a need at this year too. So great draft by the Bills. I'd give them probably like an A-, B+. You know what I mean? As far as a draft grade. The Panthers, I thought, had a phenomenal draft. Bryce Young was an easy pick though. I think they get a lot of credit for that, but I think that was the easy decision. Even though he's lacking size, you look around the modern NFL and a lot of these quarterbacks are around that same size. He may well be the smallest one, but the other thing to me too with Young too is that like the current mantra in the NFL, because of how the salary system works, is to try to get a really good quarterback on a rookie contract that you can build a team around with veteran players and good players that you pay more money for, so you can afford those players. And to me, like, he's perfect for that. Do I think necessarily his body's gonna hold up and he's gonna be an all-pro in 10 years? I don't really know. Guy's pretty small and he'd probably only take a few hits. But for the next 3 to 5, he should be sensational. I wouldn't doubt if the Panthers win that division next year, because they're just moving in so much the right direction. Jonathan Mingo at 39 was, I think he's a highly underrated receiver. I thought they got a great pick there. The safety, Jimmy Robinson, also was a really good pick down in the 4th round at pick 145. Was phenomenal. So yeah, I like the Panthers draft a lot. As a Lions fan, I was pretty disappointed with the Lions. I was pretty disappointed with their draft picks. I felt like, in both cases, they're 2 first rounders. You could have got both of them probably later. I think they could have got Jahmyr Gibbs at the 18th spot that they grabbed Jack Campbell in, and I think they could have grabbed Jack Campbell at 34, were they in the 2nd round. Okay. So I don't understand the logic in exactly what they did. That said, Brad Holmes has been a great general manager since day one. So if it works out, I won't be shocked. I was sharply against the TJ Hawkinson trade, and they literally won every game except one of them after they got rid of him, and they lost every game except one when they had him in last season. So I don't know. Maybe there was a locker room issue. I don't really know. He seems to know more than I do. The Swift trade looks similar. He gets basically peanuts back for Swift, a few peanuts back for Okudah, and you kind of think like, wow, we could have done better. Maybe not. Maybe not. He's proved me wrong before. I wouldn't be shocked if he does again. The Colts, I thought, had a really good draft. AR-15 is a guy with a lot of upside. I'm concerned that they're going to be compelled to start him right away. I don't think that's the right move. You're talking about a guy who had a 53% completion percentage in college. That is abysmal. Absolutely abysmal. He's clearly, to me, Hooker's that quintessential guy that looks like he can do a lot. He can do a lot of the things you need an NFL quarterback to do. He can do a little extra too. But where he really struggles is on the fundamentals. Is he going to be able to hit a 5-yard swing pass? Is he going to be able to hit that slant in the right spot that it doesn't get picked off? And you know what I mean? To me, that's where he struggles most. If you watch the tape on him in Florida, it's the fundamentals. So, can the Colts work with him and get that accuracy up? That's a really hard thing to develop. Really, some of the only quarterbacks I can think of, like Drew Brees, got more accurate once he was in the NFL. Mike Vick got more accurate once he was in the NFL because of coaching in the NFL. But by and large, that's not something that you can really make jump up. Although he's got a ton of upside. I mean, they say that he's faster than Cam. Newton was coming out. They say he's about the same size. And for the modern NFL with the mobile quarterbacks, I mean, when you just watched him at the NFL draft, and he was standing next to for a minute the other two quarterbacks. He's standing next to Stroud and Young. First of all, Young is well smaller than both of them, but AR-15 is just towers over both of them. I mean, he's not markedly taller than Stroud, but he's a bigger human than Stroud. He's noticed visually bigger. And that's I really like those big body quarterbacks still, because I think he's a guy that can hold up. But the question is, are they going to take time to develop them, or are they going to start him? Let's see. I felt like the Patriots actually had a pretty good draft. Christian Gonzalez was the highest rated corner in the draft in my book. I knew Witherspoon went first, and a lot of people had him first. I really like the Gonzalez pick. So I'd say the Patriots had a really great draft. The Falcons had a great draft. They're catching a lot of flack drafting a running back in the top 10, but man, Bijan is worth it because he just looks like a combination of a guy who can just do everything. He can run between the tackles. He can beat you on the edge. He can catch the ball to the backfield. He can line up a receiver. He's just one of those like do everything type backs. And so that was, and who I think really had the best draft though, to give you the long answer here, is Seattle.
Okay, tell us why.
I think a lot of people probably didn't have Seattle, but I felt like every pick they made filled a need. I think that they really just answered the question. A lot of people thought, like, are they gonna in this offseason, are they gonna look to replace Geno Smith? He had a great year, but he's older. This is the only good season really in his career. And he's on the other side of 30 now. And what they did is they really answered that question. They got rid of Rashad Penny in the offseason, but they go out and they draft Zach Charbonnet, who I think is a great 1-2 punch with Kenny Walker. He'll be great in that running game. And then beyond that, I think they got absolutely the best receiver in the draft and Jackson Smith and Jigba. He's going to line up and on a team that really, he doesn't have to be number one, which I felt like was a perfect, because to me, he projects more as like an elite slot receiver, not necessarily a number one receiver. So I think he's in a perfect situation with a great coach that runs a system that he's going to catch a lot of balls in. And so, basically, and then add to that they also got Devon Witherspoon, who we just talked about, who a lot of people, I had him rated as the second corner of the draft, but apparently they had him first. They took him in the fifth, pick. So I feel like the Seahawks really did a really good job putting a lot of more power on the offense and more pieces around Geno, and then filling some holes where they needed to outside of that, like in the secondary. And I think they're poised to win that division next year.
Okay, I just want to extrapolate a little bit. So, of course, being a Syracuse guy, we've had a long drive. We've got a few guys in the NFL, but for the first time in a long time, got as high as the second round. You mentioned the Falcons. That's where Victoriaville, Quebec's Matthew Bergeron at 6'5", 325. I think I almost nailed his exact numbers. And I saw, because, the NFL does a great job with their analysts dissecting, like nitpicking, but in a good way. Right? All the strengths, all the weaknesses. They mentioned something about his balance, like in terms of, I don't know if that means in terms of dealing with a rush, defensive rush, but he obviously they think pretty highly of him taking the second round. How do you see him eventually evolving, Matthew Bergeron, with the Falcons?
I think he's in a great spot. That offensive line, they've spent a few draft picks over the last few years on that offensive line. And I think that's always a good sign, right? To me, that's a sign that your GM is building things the right way. You build from the trenches out. That's what the winning teams do. Frankly, that's why I got questions about the Bengals, because they went the opposite direction, and I don't think you can go the opposite direction. It just doesn't work like that. So but yeah, I think basically. I won't say sky's the limit, but to me, he's a guy that, best case scenario, fans of the Falcons are basically, this is a guy that, 5 years from now, you're gonna look down at a stat sheet. You're gonna kind of forget about him because he's an offensive lineman. Then you're gonna look down at the stat sheet and realize that he's going to the Pro Bowl. You know what I mean? It's one of those offensive linemen, which is just, that's always good. I think that, he's not going to necessarily be a perennial Pro Bowler, but an easy, 8 to 12 year veteran, kind of guy that is just a steady piece of your offensive line the whole time.
All right. You mentioned cornerbacks. There was a Syracuse cornerback. He went late to Arizona, I think around the 75th I better not screw up his name or I'll be exiled from Syracuse University. But I think, oh my God, Williams. I'm not sure. Anyway, I know he was a late pick, maybe around 75 there. But if you're a late pick that late, is it kind of like, like you're? In other words, let's see, maybe makes a taxi squad, or am I selling him short a little bit?
No, not really. I think Williams is a guy that like a lot of people don't. Syracuse just hasn't been a dominant football program for a long time, so they just have a lot of eyeballs on them. I mean, they just don't. Even though they went off to the 6-0 start. Look, at the end of the day, like if you watch, I know you watch those games. I watched them too. I don't know a lot of people were watching, but Williams was. It's Garrett Williams, by the way. That corner, he was a big part of that 6-0 start. That defense was the primary drive behind that 6-0 start, and he made multiple big plays, big picks, big hits, forced fumbles in that first 6 games. Like he's kind of a do-it-all corner. He's a guy that can come up, play the run. He's got good cover skills. Maybe struggles a little more in zone than man-to-man. But at the same time, that's not a bad thing in my opinion. I think it's a lot harder when you got a corner that struggles in man-to-man but is decent in zone. Because man, to me, if you're better at man-to-man, that means you have the physical skill set. You can play zone if you're coached correctly. If you're a good zone corner, you may not have the top end speed and agility that it takes to play solid man-to-man defense in the NFL. So I think he's kind of and he's in a good spot too. That Arizona defense is very talented. You have to wonder though if that team and that coaching staff is going to put things together. They've got a very talented roster, and so far I haven't been able to do much with it. But that defense is loaded. So he gets to play with a very talented roster, and I think it's a pretty good situation from that standpoint. He's got a lot of really good teammates and veterans and really good young players to play with that I think he'll assimilate to quite well. Okay, we got a couple of minutes left, so just there's some teams that for folks have been watching the NFL for a long time. They've always had a fan base, strong fan base, and it's just there. So I'll just, in case you mentioned them, I apologize, but I just want to quickly or just do a recap of both the Steelers and the Dolphins. Yeah, the Steelers I thought had the second best draft. Of all the teams. And I took some notes here. Let me just reference them. Yeah, so Darnell Washington, in my opinion, was either the best or the second best tight end in the draft. You're talking about a guy who's 6'7", 270, blocks like an offensive lineman, and has hands like a wide receiver. That doesn't come along very often. And I think, the guys of that size and that athleticism, he ran like a 4.45 or 4.47 or something like that. That's phenomenal for a guy of that size. A 270-pounder running anything under the 4.6 is crazy. And then Joey Porter Jr. Early in the second round was a phenomenal pick as well. I like the defensive tackle from Wisconsin too, Keenan Benton. So the Steelers I think had probably the second best draft in the league, and I think you can make an argument that they were better than Seattle. I mean, you talk to most national pundits, they'll probably tell you the Steelers are better than Seattle. It's just my opinion. I really like Seattle's draft. And then I'm sorry, what was the other team? The Dolphins. Dolphins, right. They only had 4 picks in the entire draft. I mean, so that limited a little bit. I really like the corner though, Cam Smith. Basically he's one of the best ball in the air type corners, ball hawk type corners, I think, in the draft. Not a great all around guy, but definitely a guy that's good in the right situation. Devon Kane, the running back, was the fastest running back in this draft. So now the Dolphins have essentially an offense of just track stars. I mean, just across the board between Waddle, Hill, and now Kane. He's a burner, and a home run hitter. And so they're just, ridiculously fast on offense. I felt like of all the teams in this draft, the Dolphins kind of drafted to their identity as good as anyone. Right, that they just went along with this is who we are, these are the players we're after, and this is what our team's going to look like. You're just speed and space all over the field, and can you line up and stop us? All right. So when you win a Super Bowl or a couple of Super Bowls, you're a perennial contender. You don't need much, but hey, New England always drafted well, no matter the Belichick era, of course, most of it. Whether they were champions or not, they always found players, gym rats, whatever. He knew what to look for, and he found them. Kind of like what Pop has done for so long with the San Antonio Spurs on the basketball side. So did Kansas City, with their picks, I mean, did you like what they did? I mean, I got notes on every team here. So Uzoma, I liked a lot. I think that was a good pick late in the first. He could have gone higher. He could have gone in like the top 20 basically. So I thought that was a really good pick. I do outside of that though. I feel like they kind of reached. They clearly were looking for a wide receiver. They ended up taking two of them. Rashee Rice, I like a lot. Marvin Mims is a guy who's a 5-star recruit coming out of college, a real good athlete, but then had injury problems. So I mean, it reminds me kind of like of the Lions Jameson Williams pick a little bit, just kind of a guy that has a lot of upside, but we'll take a we'll see approach on it. I give the Chiefs probably like a B minus. And one thing I'll say about the Patriots too, in those years with Belichick and stuff. If you really peel back the onion a little bit, they really didn't draft all that well. In fact, I don't think they've drafted a Pro Bowler since Chandler Jones. Maybe. Okay. Oh, everyone else they have signed or traded for. So I think New England really had a situation and it's exposed itself that, they had far and away the smartest and best quarterback maybe in history. And he won a lot of games for him. And you can look and Bill is who he thought he is. I mean, I'm not saying anything from Bill Belichick. He is who he thought he is. He's a great defensive coach. He makes phenomenal halftime adjustments. Look, the only reason the Patriots were sniffing the playoffs at the end of last year was because Bill Belichick coaches and OJ Mayo coach defense so good. That's the only reason. It wasn't Matt Patricia, Mac Jones in the offense. It wasn't. It was absolutely that defense. It'll be that defense again this year. Even with Bill O'Brien, it will be that defense again this year, 100%. Okay,
last football question. Can you make Billy feel better about his Cowboys?
Cowboys are another team. It's tough, right? Because you mentioned earlier, I'm a Michigan guy. I really like Michigan players. They really swung it hard for the Michigan players, didn't they? So they draft Mozzie Smith, a defensive tackle. Mozzie's a monster in the middle of the field. I just don't know how with kind of his motor and his athleticism, how that translates to the pros just yet. I think it's a wait and see approach. I do like the linebacker they drafted, Demario Overshown, real good athletic linebacker. He's kind of like a poor man's Micah Parsons. He's kind of a do everything kind of guy. Like he can blitz the quarterback, he can cover pretty good. So I think they're really building a really good mix on defense there. And I think one thing Billy can really take solace in. Actually, Schoonmaker I like a lot. The tight end they drafted out of Michigan, I like him a lot. I think he compares to that Dalton Kincaid pretty good. Both of them have really good hands, good body control in the air. Man, Michigan's put some good tight ends in the league these next few years. Eric All's coming out next year. They're just putting a lot of good tight ends in the league. But like I said, I think their best pick was probably Demario Overshown. And I think that was late in the 3rd round, maybe early in the 4th. I really liked him a lot, had him pretty high on my board. But I think that was probably their best pick. And outside of that, it was kind of ho-hum. They didn't have a lot of picks.
Okay. Alex, perfect, because we're just at the top of the clock. So spectacular stuff from you as always. Thanks for helping us out. I appreciate it. Really appreciate it. For those of you just tuning in, if you're going to watch it replayed on Facebook Live or on your favorite social media outlet, of course, we're on the Fired Up Network. Thanks to our good buddy Joseph Pasek, producer. So we're on multiple outlets. So we're getting great exposure because of the Fired Up Network. So thanks to Joe and all of his associates. And Billy, not to fret, he'll be back next week. He's on work, like his regular work assignment. So just to let you know, he's fine. He's feeling well. He'll be back, and I'm sure he'll chew me out for something I said or didn't say.
Oh yeah. You'll get the arguing and the fireworks again next week. Norm and I just get along, and we have good, friendly conversation. There's no bad blood here.
Yeah, and of course, we got to thank Costa again, the Standardbred Horse Racing Association of Ontario, and Nikki, the King of Carpets. Can't do a show without sponsors, and we're grateful to them. So thanks to all of you, for sure. Without an audience, there's no show. So thanks to all of you for tuning us in, whether it's live or on Facebook Live or on whatever platforms you watch. We're grateful. Believe us, we are. And thank you so much. Alex, the encyclopedia, Alex Campbell. Thanks so much, buddy.
Thank you. Thank you, Norm.
Okay, folks, thanks for tuning us in. Thanks to Joe Pasek, Fired Up Network. God bless. Have a good week. Talk to you next Monday right here.